This is the Genesis training on NJ SLEDs and reporting the student management fields. This training is all about the fields included in the NJ SLEDs student management submission. This training is really not for how to submit your files into the NJ SLEDs portal. We're going to be showing you how to get to trainings on that. All right, so this is focused on the fields, where they're located in Genesis, and filling them out so this way you can accurately report them. Also today we're going to start by talking about where to find help on the Genesis side and where to find help on the NJ SLEDs side. We're going to quickly review the different reports that are maintained by Genesis for NJ SLEDs reporting. Best practices for pulling out those files. And then we're going to go into detail about creating a student enrollment record and what that means for NJ SLEDs. But the majority of this training will be the review of all the NJ SLEDs fields. All right, so where to find help, training, and guides for both Genesis and NJ SLEDs. The Genesis help site is support-sis.genesisedu.com. There you will find our ticket system, our list of all of our documentation and our videos. And actually, right when you get there, you can type in your keywords. Window will look like this. You could search any keywords in there, like NJ SLEDs or the specific submission that you're looking for help on. This slide also has shortcuts to specific areas in our documentation and NJ SLEDs documentation just to help everyone out. NJ SLEDs help and videos, you can get to all that information by going to nj.gov/education/SLEDs. This is what their website looks like. The slide also has shortcuts to NJ SLEDs submission calendar. You want to make sure you're aware of all the submission dates and when the deadlines are. So the first day NJ SLEDs will open is on September 2nd. All right, so this training today, we're going to focus on the student management fields. And we'll talk about the different submissions that are available. Be aware of the trainings and webinars on NJ SLEDs. You actually go to their overview. Here are their upcoming webinars. So we do recommend that you supplement this training with the introduction to SLEDs as well as the student management submission, right? So that's the new title of the submission. This is really what was previously called the SID management submission, right? For issuing state IDs to students. All right, so next one is coming up on August 21st. All right, and then we have some links to various Genesis documentations. We have our student management submission. This is the SID/student management submission and all about that specific file submission to this state. This is a great reference for you. I recommend you bookmark this, or whoever does NJ SLEDs or NJ Smart Reporting at your district, bookmark this for themselves as an easy reference. This was just updated with all the latest information. We have all of the newest fields listed on here that are collected. There'll be an indication of what Genesis screen they're located on. Most of these are screens within the student record. All right, and then a little bit of information about the field itself, whether or not it's required. It might give you some tips on how they can be set or if they can be set in mass. All right, so these are the fields that we're reviewing today. We also have a document called NJ SLEDs FAQ. Right, this is just our frequently asked questions about reporting in general. This is a great reference to use for why students are excluded from a collection. So if you're not aware already, Genesis tries to do its best to report the students that have to be reported by your district. Students that it thinks are not your district's responsibility will be omitted from the collection file. All right, so this is laying out the thought process the system goes through to exclude students from your file automatically. Right, and we'll show you how to check on that if that's the case for any of your students. Our state reporting training videos page takes a look at our other state reporting videos, right? And then we put shortcuts also to the different NJ SLED resources. So our student management homepage, that's where you can download a copy of the handbook for NJ SLEDs. Let me just click on Student Management Data Handbook. You'll see it looks almost identical to NJ Smart's SID Management. It more or less is the same report that we're working on today. The only differences are just some minor validation changes in the validation rules. We have a shortcut to the reporting calendar as well, and then the trainings and webinars page that we showed you. So now I'm going to talk about the different reports maintained by Genesis. So Genesis has a module just for New Jersey. So in your module dropdown, you'll just see NJ. All right, and it takes you to the module tab just called New Jersey. And this is where many of the state required reports are stored, and you can run them at any time. On this tab is where many of the reports exist, and they can be run anytime and collected. So just to mention a few best practices with this. All right, so each report is listed here. And again, previously, NJ Smart's title of the report was called SID Management. And we know that SLEDS is calling it Student Management, which is not a big change. Many of these we would have finished reporting already, such as the end of the 24-25 school year. In some cases, you'll see separate copies of the same report. And the purpose behind those is that it runs a different way. Previously, Genesis had a fall submission, for example. So SID Student Management fall submission is the same report. It's just collected during the fall. And the difference with that is Genesis will include your inactive students from the previous year. So anyone who withdrew over the summer or your graduates, they would all be included in that. The reason you don't see that yet today is because we're still waiting on some clarification from the state as to who is included exactly in that report. Right? And once we finalize everything, that'll be released for our districts to use prior to when the submitting period opens on September 2nd. So because it's not in place yet, today we're going to focus on the regular student management report. All right, so here's a basic how-to on collecting and downloading your files. So once you find the report that you want to run, you're going to click the Collect button for that report. And depending on the report, it may ask you a series of questions. For example, the regular SID student management report allows you to enter a date, and it will only pull students that have entered or left after a certain date. And this is really just to use for like a date during the school year. That's really what you want to use here. All right, so it'll collect only your recent registration or enrollment changes after that date. So students who entered the district after the date or left after that date. This particular report also has the option to type in the word summer to collect only students who withdrew or graduated over the summer. So those are all your summer withdrawals. Okay, so it's a very different report, or I should say a very different list of students you'll get depending on if you use those options before collecting the file. But the basic idea is you have to collect your file before you download it. If I were to download this file right now, the last time it was run is on July 28th, so my data is only accurate as of that date. After this collection is done running, you'll see today's date entered in the created on field. So then I know I am downloading my data as of that date. So as soon as this is done running, you could do that. So after collecting to download, you'll click the button in the CSV column. And best practice for that is to submit the file right away. If you try to open the file, you will disrupt the formatting of the file. Any leading zeros are wiped away, and sending the opened copy to the state will cause issues for you. So click on the CSV. It's going to ask you which students to include, in which you can pick one of your student lists. You're going to leave that as all students in collection unless you have a reason for pulling out specific list of students. And then when you create, it will download a file to your computer, and that's the file that you submit off to NJ SLEDS. Right, so just looking at this file, we have all the fields we're going to be going over today. And a couple things to mention about this. Today we're going to be going over these fields in an order that has to do really with their category. So we're going to go through all the birth information first, and then all the graduation fields, we're going to go over those together at the very end. Right. I also want to mention students can be listed multiple times in this file. Right. So that's if they have multiple enrollments within the district. An example of that would be if a student transferred between schools within your district, or if they transferred out of district in the middle of the school year and you need to continue reporting them to the state. So the training today is all about manipulating these student fields within Genesis in order to pull out the correct file. All right, so for that, I'm going to introduce to you the Students NJ SLEDS tab. So I'm going to go to Student Data, open up my sample student, and then visit their tab. Right now, again, it says NJ Smart/SLEDS. And right away, it opens up the tab called SID Snapshot. We'll be going through a couple of other tabs under here today. SID Snapshot is going to show you for the student what is in the current snapshot, or in other words, what is in that file that we just looked at how to collect. You may see the other SID student management reports here, right? So eventually your fall submission will exist here as well, and you can take a glimpse into that file for the student. And then here is where we would see the student's enrollment record. So when I mentioned students can appear in the file in multiple rows, this is what we're referring to here. So we call them enrollment records within Genesis. Enrollment records are created automatically and based on registration transactions. So in a moment, I'm going to transfer a student. Then you'll see that there are 2 enrollment records. These can also be created manually for students. So if you wanted to do that, you can take this enrollment record here and manually create their SID record. Right, the screen will tell you the student has manual records created. The button then turns into remove manually created records so that you can go back to what you had, in which Genesis automatically captures all these fields for you. So our manually created record is here. We could duplicate that to create 2 records. And it's very rare that you would need to do that. That's if a student is transferring, for example, between 2 different out-of-district schools. Right? We don't really have a transfer tool for that within Genesis. Right? So the only way to capture the fact that they attended 2 different out-of-district schools would be to do that. And then since these are manual records, you can actually edit this data manually. So it's no longer pulling these fields from different places on the student record. This is now a manually entered student management report for the student. And you'll be able to edit either of those enrollment records respectively so that you can report different data for those 2 rows in the file. Okay, so that's essentially what I did here is I created 2 rows in the file for the 1 student, and I can report each one accordingly. Now I'm going to demonstrate how Genesis would automatically create one of these records for you. And to do that, I'm going to start by going to the Students Tracking tab. And I want to find a student in one of my middle schools, actually, because I have two middle schools at my district. I want to transfer a student between them. All right, so I have a student here who started in the middle school. Right, they're going to be attending all year, and our demonstration district has a very long school year because we needed to start earlier for training purposes. New for Genesis this year, you have transfer and withdrawal buttons right on this screen. So this is your shortcut into the registration module where you can transfer the student. I'm just going to quickly fill this out so that they are transferred to the new middle school as of today's date. I'm going to choose my T2 and R2 codes since those look to be the most appropriate codes in this case. Transferring gives you actually a lot of different options to clear homeroom out and clear their schedule out. But at the top, those are the essentials, what date you're transferring them as of and where they're being transferred to. All right, so my student's tracking screen just updated. This is one of the screens that we'll be going over today in detail. So we have their original registration transaction. That's for their school year or how they began the school year. This is showing me now that they spent 2 days at their original middle school. They now transferred to their other middle school as of today's date. The rest of the school year, they'll be attending the other school. Right, we can see their entry and exit codes were saved here. All right, so what this means for NJ SLEDS reporting is if we go back to the Students NJ Smart/SLEDS tab, we now have those two enrollment records. Okay, and this is what they should look like. They should really just, they should be indicating the same thing. So the bottom one here we're seeing now is the student's original entry. So on the 11th, they entered with an R2. They exited on the 13th with a T2. Because of that, their status for their original school is now I for inactive. But since they are still active in the district, their district status is A for active. We see the second enrollment, the one on the top, is for the student's new school, and you can see their new entry date is listed there. They are now active in that school. And I believe NJ SLEDS will give you errors for students who are reported differently for district status. So if district status is A for one of their rows, it has to be A for everything. Same with inactive. So they have to have the same status under district. Now, school status, I believe you can only have one school reported with the A for active. So these are all fields in the student management file. Okay, we're just showing you ones that might be different at the top, that might be different for each of these enrollments. But in the file, you can expect to see 2 rows for the student based on this screen. Because of that, any of the other fields can also be reported differently. An example of that is their attendance for that enrollment record. So they have 3 days at their original school here, all right, and then so far in the school year, they only have 1 day at their new school. All right, so you could probably see as I'm going through this, as you click these, the information down below is the full report for that enrollment record. Okay, so if you have any students that have 2 of these, just know that when you click into these, the bottom of the screen might be showing you different information. All right, so it really depends on what row in the file you want to look at. And the data you're seeing down here is a convenient way to see the information in the file without actually having to run the collection as you saw me do. So instead of running the collection and waiting a few minutes for it to run and then downloading the file to look at your data, this is a great screen to use for troubleshooting, for making corrections on students. So as you're working in the system, you can easily see what's going to be pulled out for the student's student management submission. So for this student, you get to see all their data as you're correcting it. And going back to this, I just want to mention that this was a transfer that occurred in the middle of the school year. All right, so performing a summer transfer, on the other hand, would result in the student just getting placed into that one school. So if you do a summer transfer between schools, then you would only see the one transaction on the screen, right? We're going to move on, and now we're ready to go into all the NJ SLEDs reported field from Genesis. So now you're going to see a little bit of a difference in the order. So we're going to review these fields in a different order than what's in the file and what's in our documentation. We're going to start out with the basics, all the basic demographic fields. All right, so in this list, we have the student's local identification number. That's the ID that's assigned by your district. So your district will come up with a pattern used when assigning numbers to students, and those typically do not change. And you'll notice all these fields are available to enter during time of registration. So then we have their state identification number. That's the New Jersey assigned ID number. That's always 10 digits. And no two students in the state share the same identification number, so they're unique to everyone in New Jersey. New Jersey SLEDs will issue you your new state ID numbers. And although these can be entered during time of registration, Genesis has a screen available back under the New Jersey module for importing those state IDs. So you'd go back to the New Jersey module, right? And then under the Tools tab this time, we have a tab for the NJ Smart import, right? So for these other fields, I'm going to defer to the student's demographic screen, so this way you can see all of them in action. Right, so I have a student record open, and we're under their demographic screen. The first page it brings you to is called Required. They gave it that title just because it has many of the state required fields. Right, so here we can see the student's ID once again, and the state student ID fields that we just covered. And then we have the first, middle, and last name. So we have a first name field. Just know that that is the one that's used in the report and not the birth legal name field. Either one of those can be collected during time of registration or both. And you'll see that as you're registering your students, one will autofill the other. So this way nothing is missed. So this is for students that go by a different name other than, and as per the requirements, that is the name that the state wants us to use in our reports. Right, so we have our first name here, we have our middle name here, and then we have our last name on the left side. All right, and then we have the gender code. All right, so there's a difference here too with gender versus birth gender. The same idea as the first name. The state wants us to use the preferred gender the student goes by. And in this list, your district can actually create additional codes for gender. The state is only collecting M, F, or X. So Genesis will automatically report M for male or F for female. Any additional codes in that dropdown will just be reported as X because that's the only other choice NJ SLEDs has on that report. If you're looking to edit or see where the codes are in Genesis, you can visit your setup module and go under codes. Right, and then you will see one of your codes tables is for gender types. So we have a gender preference table. You can click into those codes and see what the list is and edit as necessary. Right, but all the state required ones are in place, F, M, or X. But again, it doesn't matter how many different choices you have here. Whatever you choose other than M or F will automatically be reported as an X. Other student management collected fields, we have race and ethnicity fields, also entered during time of registration. Birth date is here as well. All right, students' home languages are set a little bit further down. So This is different from the student's primary language. This is asking up to 5 languages now that the student speaks in the household. All right, so home language, if you click anywhere in that field, you'll have a pop-up window that now allows you to select up to 5 languages. Beyond that, the checkboxes go gray and you can't check off any additional ones. Okay? Just remember to save if you make any changes. All right, and then the last one on this slide was the year of graduation. Okay, so not class of. Right, so Genesis reports the year of graduation to the student management report, not the class of. Typically, the class of does not change. If you're a K-12 district entering a new kindergartner, this would be the class of for their graduating high school class. I mean, typically that does not change. It's based on their age. Year of graduation would represent the actual year that they are graduating high school. And you'll see many of the graduation requirements in Genesis are all based on the student's class of and not the year of graduation. Right? So that's the difference with those fields. So I believe with the exception of the graduation year, all of these fields are available in both registration and parent registration. So when you collect your applications online from parents, they can fill out all these fields as well. On this next slide, we're going to be talking about the birthplace and residency fields. So also items that are typically entered during time of registration. These fields you're going to see on the demographic screen as well as other screens on the student record. So revisiting the demographic screen, we have birth city, birth state, and birth country, and there's been some changes to that. City and state of birth, you're going to see those are only required if the student is U.S. born. So if the birth country is the United States, that's when the city and state will be required for this report. Country of birth previously was not required for the U.S. born students. It's now required for all students. So definitely make sure you have that filled in. There is a mass change available for that. The student's first entry date into a U.S. school. Right? So that's going to be a field towards the bottom of their demographic screen. This is typically only required if they're born outside of the U.S. That's the only time Genesis will automatically report that field and include it in the submission for the student. Even if you have this filled in, I don't believe this is included in the report if you indicated United States as the birth country. Immigration status field. That's a field on the report, but it's not actually on this screen. Immigration status is going to be calculated by Genesis. All right, and again, this is another field required for all non-U.S. born students, and N is reported automatically if the district entry date or the first entry into a U.S. school date is more than 3 years prior to the start of the school year. Right? Otherwise, if it's less than 3 years, then a Y is reported for immigration status. You need to reference that. That's a good one for our SID student management submission article in our help system. So this is the one I mentioned earlier that acts as a good reference for all the fields being collected. What I just mentioned about immigration status will be listed here. So the same thing is written here if you want a written explanation of that, right? Because it is looking at 2 different dates to determine immigration status. Next field on our slide is the resident municipal code. Right, this is indicated on the student's demographic screen just based on this municipality code. That's something that is also collected or can be collected from the parent during parent registration. You can also default this field for your district if the majority of the students all have the same municipality code. Next is the city of residence field. City of residence is going to be taken actually from the contact screen. So it's looking directly at the student's legal address. That's taken from the Guardian 1, who they lived with for a majority of the time at least. All right, so it's just looking right at the name of the city on their address. And the last field would be the 3 fields for reporting resident school district information: county code resident, district code resident, and school code resident. And so we refer to these as the CDS codes. They have a certain number of digits. Resident information is going to be set under the tracking tab for the student. Then you have to go under Other, and that opens up a series of other tracking record tabs. All right, we're going to be going over most of these today. And one of them is titled Resident District. Okay. All right, so this represents the school and district the student would attend based on where they reside. It can be entered while you're registering the student. You can use this screen to denote that the student lived in 2 different places in the middle of the year. So you can add additional tracking records for residents. With the CDS codes, you don't have to enter the actual school codes anymore. You can just type in the name, so the name of the school. And some of these tracking records you'll see have an optional end date. That means they extend up until the end of the school year. I have to first end that record and then add a new one. Again, just type in the name of the school. The one that comes up should be the exact title and spelling of the school, as well as the CDS code. All right, so this just indicates that the student lived in one residence and then moved as of September 10th. Right, any notes you want to put as part of that, you can. Right, so that's where resident, county, district, and school come from. So the county gets a 2-digit code, the districts get a 4-digit code, and school gets a 3-digit code. So those should be all of the latest ones from the state. The state does update those periodically. Right, and for those of you that may have incorrect codes in your database, we can show you how to update those for your system. Before I go into the next slide, I'm going to be talking about that. All right, revisiting the SLEDS website, they have an area for key documents, and that's right now looks like the first document that's available. So this is our county, district, school CDS code list. You can download it in Excel and see all the latest school codes. So yes, this is a listing of every single county, district, school code that is possible for you to report. It also lets you know what grade levels are valid for that school and what category it's under, if it's just a resident school or if it's a private school or charter school. All right, so this is what Genesis is looking for when it pulls in the CDS codes from the state. And basically, if you want to have Genesis do that for you so that it's not a manual process for your district, I'm going to show you how to turn on that feature. So first off, if you need to adjust any of those county, district, school codes manually, the list where they're located in Genesis is under the Setup module under the tab called State Schools. So this is where you can either update the schools under the Schools tab or update the district under the Districts tab. You shouldn't have to add your own counties, but if you do, that screen would be under Setup Codes, and then you'll see county codes in this list that you can click into. Now, if you'd like to have Genesis automatically import the official list, and it does that nightly, you can visit the module called Core. Right, the Scheduler tab has all of the background jobs that run overnight or periodically. And the one you want to enable is called CDS OPEID import. Right, so you want to make sure that's checked off as enabled. All right, and then within the settings, as far as what you want it to do, make sure import CDS is checked off. And Genesis automatically knows to look at the correct place for that. Right, so as long as those two checkboxes are enabled, this will work for your school district. Right, and you can even run the task immediately. It'll do so automatically for you, so you won't have to come here again, but you can run it immediately just to see everything is updated. And then once it's done, you can return to your setup state schools and verify that that school is now listed. Takes us to our next slide. We're going to focus now on the fields that relating to enrollment, their enrollment status within the district, and other necessities like grade level and program type code. So for this, we're going to travel back to my example student here, and I'm going to go right to their tracking tab. And so again, if you're not familiar with this screen, this gives you a great picture of their enrollment within the district. This impacts things like their attendance and what school they're going to show up within. Like if you're doing a search within a particular school in your district. So this has everything to do with enrollment here. All right, so just looking back at our student that we transferred earlier, we transferred them between schools. So Genesis is getting the reported attending school from this tracking record. Right, so it's the one that they're now in. However, in this case, both schools are reported to NJ SLEDS. Right? Grade level and program type code are here. So this student is in 6th grade. Their program type, which is what this stands for, talking about their enrollment. So that's the specific program of instruction they're enrolled in. The district status and district entry date, as well as the school entry date and school exit date. So that's also controlled by the transactions that you do within registration. And by the way, to learn more about those and how to transfer students, please also watch our registration training video that we have in our documentation. So although those are not necessarily fields here, such as school status and district status and all that, those fields are affected by what you do through their registration and what transactions you run for your students. All right, so earlier you saw how I completed a transfer for a student, and that was done mid-year, resulting in 2 transactions listed here. And then we took a look at how that translates to our NJ SLEDS reporting by looking at the Student NJ SLEDS tab. So we have our 2 enrollment records. In other words, these are 2, you're going to get 2 rows in the student management file for this one student. Right. So just based on us doing a transfer between those schools, the previous school the student was in now has an inactive school status. Their new school for this year has an A for active status. And again, because the student is still active within the district, their district status would remain active for both of those enrollment records. The district status is the student's enrollment within your district, within your Genesis database. If they're inactive in your database, they're going to be showing with an I for district status in student management reporting. Right. The district entry date not actually shown up here, but it would be the same down below. So here we see district entry date. This is just taking the district entry date field from the student's demographic page. And so we have their entry into the district, and then the state is looking for their most recent district entry date. So the Genesis field it pulls from would be current entry in district. If you withdrew the student previously and they re-entered in your district, you should see that field update automatically. Neither of these are looking at the registration date. All right, so that is just capturing when you registered the student into Genesis. right? So that field is not reported or included in this report we're focusing on today. Right now, the school exit date and school exit code, that's taken from your latest withdrawal information on the student. So it's going to correspond to the transaction being reported. In this case, we actually did not even do a withdrawal for the student. We simply transferred them from one middle school to the other. But Genesis is automatically using the exit date. This would be their exit date for their previous middle school, and then it includes the withdrawal code that we used at the time that we completed the transfer. Right, so the system knows how to do that automatically for you. If I were to now go in and withdraw the student, then we would see that those are filled in. So withdrawing them also creates a new transaction on this screen, the tracking screen. It creates an additional line if you were to withdraw them in the middle of the school year. If that were the case, we would see the school exit date and withdrawal code filled in for my the second middle school that they were enrolled in. Right, the school status would say I for both, and then the district status would say I for both. All right, so we went over the resident CDS code. You'll notice they're all sitting here for you to easily see. We also have related fields attending CDS and receiving CDS. Right, so it's the same concept. It's the county district school codes, but the state collects where they're attending and what district and school are the receiving district. So we already looked at resident CDS. Want to take a little bit of a glimpse into the attending and receiving. All right, so these two fields are calculated by Genesis. So by that we mean Genesis tries to figure out where they're actually attending or what district should be the receiving district based on their situation. And the system looks in several places to try and identify that. And what I recommend doing is that you become familiar with the end of our article. So going back to our article for SID Student Management Submission, beyond all of the fields that you see, as I mentioned, this is a great reference to use as you're filling these out. Eventually, you'll get to the attending and receiving code fields, and it'll tell you to look at the bottom for how Genesis determines those. Okay. All right, so this is what you want to be aware of for reference, because we use this all the time, even working on support, just to determine how a student was handled. The article goes over the CDS codes for receiving and the thought process Genesis goes through to determine that for any student. And the very next section is the same thing, but for the attending CDS codes. In most cases, it's going to be the school that the student is in currently. And Genesis is aware of the CDS codes on your in-district buildings based on the Set Up Schools tab and having those state codes indicated there. This is going to be a little bit different for students who are in an out-of-district building. So students enrolled in a kind of a holding school for placing these students because they don't attend any of your in-district schools. All right, so out-of-district is going to have the CDS codes blank, and the reason for that is so Genesis can ignore the school codes here and look elsewhere for those attending school codes. Right. And again, the way it does that is just referring to those, to the documentation on how it does that. Right. So the student is in a Genesis school with a valid CDS code. Right? If it's not, then Genesis will look at the next item. In this case, it's the student's IEP. So that's another place that it's possible to enter the actual school they're attending. If the student doesn't have an IEP, then it looks at their tracking record for tuition. And sees if there is an attending school listed there. And so those are probably the two most common places where you would have the attending school listed for a student. So either the current school that they're in within Genesis, or if they're out of district, it's probably under their IEP or their tuition record. And we'll get to those two types of records in a few moments. Just going back to my students NJ SLEDS tab. All right, so you can reference what Genesis is calculating for attending and receiving, because again, there are no physical fields on their record for these items, right? Like we had for resident tracking. For resident, we put in a specific school code there. For attending and receiving, the system goes in and figures it out what to display here. You can use the binoculars. Right, this is a helpful tool to see how it is setting those CDS codes, how it is arriving at those codes. So this is saying that these codes were set based on the school the student is enrolled in. Right, so you can always take a look at that, and if you're not sure where these codes are coming from, you can take a look. If for whatever reason you can't get the system to calculate the correct codes for you, that's why we have these override buttons next to many of the collected fields. So as you're going through this, they can be overridden. I recommend that you use that as a last resort. So only if you can't get Genesis to fill in the right codes for you. The reason for that is it's very difficult to track what students have overrides in place. All right, so districts that have a lot of students that they use the override fields on, they usually have to track those students separately just so they can look at those students before they report them. Right, so if the student status changes, that means these fields are no longer automatically done by Genesis. Right, so if you have an override field in, it will never change. Right. Next slide is our category screen field. Right, so these we bunched together just because they're all set on the student categories tab. So I'll be going through these individually. So I'm going to go back to the student's demographic screen, and next to the required tab that we reviewed before, we have categories. Right. On here, you'll see a lot of the miscellaneous student fields. And there's a wide variety. There's everything from insurance provider to the locker that they're assigned. Okay, so first one for our report is going to be the insurance status and insurance provider. All right, so the insurance provider field is up at the top. That can be set here in addition to where it's set within the nurse's medical screens. Right? And then the state collected field, health insurance status, they basically want to know whether they have it or not. And that report's based on the has medical insurance field. So it will report a Y for yes and an N for no. So just make sure that's filled in as a yes if you're filling in the student's insurance provider. All right, and those two fields, by the way, they can be collected during registration. Those are also available for you to collect them from parents using the parent portal. Right, so you can publish a form and have parents fill it out. And as the parent fills out their insurance provider, that's automatically filled in to this field here. The retained field is reported based on the screen. Right, the Genesis field is called retained in previous school year. As you can see, the student is being retained every single school year. This box is checked off automatically by the summer rollover process in Genesis. Right, so if you're not familiar with that process, the demographic screen has two important fields for summer rollover to occur. The next school and the next year grade level where the student will be attending next year. So it's possible to retain students or hold them in the same grade level so that they repeat the same grade level next year. So if your students were set up that way, then you would have set them to the same next grade level as they are in this year or as they were in last year. And if that's true for any of your students, you would have seen that Genesis automatically checked off the retained checkbox here for you on the category screen. Right, so that's what's connected to the state report field called retained. So if you're seeing this checked off now, that would indicate that the student is repeating the same grade level they were in last year. Okay, you don't have to check this ahead of time prior to your summer rollover. Right? But you should manually check this box if the student was not retained until after the summer rollover, right? Because at that point it would not have been automatically set for you. All right, migrant. All right, migrant is also a state collected field. It's just a simple checkbox on the screen. Indicate migrant. All right, gifted and talented is also just a simple checkbox on the screen. I'll give you some extra pointers about that field because we have a new feature in Genesis that can also set that automatically for you. All right, so gifted and talented, this is a newer feature in Genesis. They added a way for you to actually take a course and mark it as a gifted and talented course within your scheduling. So very quickly, in your scheduling curriculum, which is your list of courses, you can open a course and mark it as a gifted and talented course. Right, that means that any student in that course will automatically get that checkbox, and they'll be reported as gifted and talented in your state reports. Now, to get Genesis to do that, you have to go into your Setup Schools tab and tell the system which schools should have that ability. So I'm clicking into a school, and I am visiting Basic Parameters tab. On this tab, it's the fifth checkbox. It says calculate gifted and talented students using gifted and talented courses. Right, and that's basically saying for any student in a course where I checked it off gifted and talented, the students will automatically be considered G&T for state reporting. Right? After the school year is out, that will automatically reset. So they would have to be in a G&T course next year in order to get the box checked on them once again. Right, so that's what's in your Setup Schools, and clicking into a school's Basic Parameters tab. Close out that tab. Return back to my Students Category screen. All right, Military Connected Student Indicator is also a field. So you'll see it's called Military Connected Indicator. Right. Students are unknown by default. Right. Otherwise, you can select one of the three options to indicate their military connection. This is another field that can be collected from your parents as they submit a parent portal form. So you can include this in your back to school forms and have the parents fill it out for you, just like the insurance provider. The field called 8th Technological Literacy, also on the screen. So it's called 8th grade tech proficiency. And that's just a manual field that you can set accordingly. In-district placement. And so that's one of the newer fields collected by the state. And there was a change put in the Genesis this year for the in-district placement. So I want to make sure I go over that with everyone. In-district placement was previously on the screen as a drop-down. Now you'll see the field listed, but there's a button for change. Right, and change allows you to set those accordingly, and this is based on their enrollment. So going back to my student example, we transferred them between two middle schools. And if you're not aware, by the way, in-district placement is a state field that basically indicates the reason why they're not attending their resident school. So if a student is a resident of your district, but they're attending a school other than their residence school, which which is based on where they reside. Then the state requires you to put in an in-district placement, which basically indicates the reason for them attending that school. So, for example, student is attending a specialized program, and that's why they are not attending their resident school, or they're attending in an LIEP program. You can also have any other reason indicated there. So this is only required if the resident school does not match the one that they're attending. And that's why the new change this year is it allows you to put in an in-district placement for each of these schools respectively, right? So you may have a different reason they were attending this non-resident school versus this non-resident school. Typically, one of them is going to be the resident school, right? So you would leave the in-district placement blank and then just fill it in for the non-resident school. So it's giving us two options here, just so everyone knows. It's giving you two options based on the fact that we have a transfer for this student. So it's because we have two enrollment records for them, that's what results in allowing us to put in two in-district placements for them. The final item on the demographic category screen is the checkbox for non-public. So checking off this box is just one step in coding the student for the state's non-public field. The next step, we'll review that when we get to the student's special ed tab. If a student is listed in a Genesis school that is marked as a non-public school, then this box will be checked off for you automatically. So in the demographic category screen, that's where that item is set, right? And it's only required in specific cases. Okay. So the in-district placement for NJ SLEDs, this is going to only be required if their attending district matches their resident district. So this example, it would not be required for the student. All right, so that's if they're attending the same district as their resident district, and obviously the county as well. However, the school code is different from their resident school code, right? So in those instances, the state wants to know why they're not attending the resident school within your district. They're attending a different school within your district. So I would imagine this is only reported for students who attend within the district. Out of district students are going to be reported with a different attending district as their resident. So right away, we know that the in-district placement is not required for them. Hopefully that clarifies. And if you want another explanation, you can always look at the student management handbook from SLEDs versus what we have in our submission guide for that field. They might give you another good explanation there. We're going to cover fields specifically on one screen within the student's record. So they are listed here under the student's NJ Smart/SLEDs tab. Right. So in the other sub-tabs, you're looking for the one called NJ Smart Student Fields or NJ SLED Student Fields, and a majority of the miscellaneous fields are here. Right, starting with the student learning environment. This is something that was new early on during the pandemic. Right, just to indicate their learning instruction, full-time remote or full-time in person. So I believe everyone now defaults to just full-time on premises, and that's how majority of your students are probably reported. Okay. Title I, I'm going to skip for now and talk about later, but this is the override for the reported Title I indicator field, right? Later on, we will show you how Genesis can calculate this for you automatically. But this is where you can go to override that and put in a specific value. We have the federal HS math testing requirement. This is actually the field title it has on the state report as well. And your choices for students completing the math requirement. All right, the only thing Genesis does at the moment for as far as automatically reporting this field is for seniors, this will default to an A. If the student has met their math graduation pathway and they took the math NJGPA test. Yeah. So as long as they're meeting the graduation pathway with a code S for math, right, they'll get an A reported in this field. All right, and that we'll do more of a deep dive into at the end when we go over the graduation fields. These two next ones are new for the student management submission, the IEP graduation course requirement, and IEP graduation attendance. There's only two values to choose from in there. It's whether or not they met the requirements for graduation. All right, so these two are also available under Mass Change. So in the Student Data Mass Change tab, you'll see there's a tool there for math updating students. And a lot of these fields are available there for you to mass apply to your students. And it's by student list, so you can take a large group of students at once and update them all to the same value. Right, student internet connectivity field is also right in the middle, and you could see the same choices available that match what is in the state handbook for completing this field. There's no special way that Genesis sets these automatically for you. These few fields I'm going over, the IEP, the internet connectivity, as well as these next two, the student device owner and the student device type. Right, so these we may have math update tools available for you, but the system doesn't figure out automatically what to insert into these fields. And these next few are one or more recent additions to the state report. The deaf hard of hearing field is reported based on this deaf hard of hearing checkbox under the NJ Student Fields tab. Language acquisition is then required for students who have this checkbox, deaf hard of hearing, right? And this you're selecting the appropriate value here. So the state will expect this to be filled in as long as deaf hard of hearing is checked off, right? And then we have an additional override field for the New Jersey fields titled ELP screener date, right? And this we'll get to in just a few moments when we start talking about the ML, ELL tracking and related fields. This is simply another override field in case you don't have the proper information in place. You can tell Genesis what you want to report for that field. And lastly, this is just another place to change the in-district placement on the student. So if you click change, you would see the same pop-up window as your category screen did. Next slide, we're going to start introducing tracking records a little bit more. Right, so these are all the possible tracking records that make up a student's data, and these are all the ones that have something that is collected by the state. So we're first going to go into the Title I field. You saw how there was an override for that. Then we're going to look at some of the special ed related fields that are used in state reporting. We have a free reduced lunch code. We have the student share time enrollment. There's one field, I believe, for alternative education program. And we have several fields for homeless, reporting and ML program reporting to look at. And then the tuition tracking is just for one thing, the tuition code. So first I want to talk about tracking records. What is a tracking record? So you may have seen me before adjusting the student's resident district information, all right, and then you saw how I created 2 tracking records for the student. Right, so tracking records are used to capture a student's status or information with an effective date, and that's what enables us to collect state fields for a snapshot. So for a specific reporting period, usually the state wants you to collect students as of a snapshot date. So all of their effective information as of that date. So in order to determine the different codes and statuses to report, Genesis has to use an effective date and then see which of the tracking records fall within that date. So if today's date falls within this one here, this would be the status that's used at that time. Okay. So that's really my definition of tracking record. It's a status or information, but with effective dates. There's always a start and end date. The end date is not always required, as you see here. And usually for Genesis, that means that status will extend even into the next school year because there's an open end date. Right. So now that we talked about what tracking records are, we're going to go through the different ones that would impact state reporting. Right. First one I want to go over is called Title I indicator. So that field is now automatically set. As you saw just a moment ago under the Students NJ Smart and Student Fields tab, there is an override for Title I indicator, right? So Genesis will automatically use this if you have it filled in. If you want the system to figure out what the student should be for you, then just leave this blank, and the system will do so as follows. This is also a recent update for Genesis in how we calculate the proper NJ Title I field for students. Right. There's also a great reference for this at the bottom of our student management document. Okay, so it refers to the Setup Schools tab. So this is going back to where our schools are configured in Genesis. As soon as you open your school, you'll have a Title I field, and you can indicate the best choice for this, right? So in this case, they give you a 1, 2, 4, or 5. Right, and these are the possible values that you also report for the Title I indicator. Right, so based on what you're selecting here for the school, the system will handle the reporting of the field based on that and whether they have a basic skills program. Okay. So the special one I want to mention is the public school-wide program. Right? So changing your school to number 2 public school-wide program, this is automatically going to be reporting a 2 for the student's Title I field, and that's school-wide. And that's regardless of anything else on the student's record. So you don't need to have a basic skills record for that, and it's automatic. For the public targeted assistance program and students within a school marked that way, it's going to report the number 1 for students on the report only if they have a basic skills record. And if the school is marked a 1 and they have a basic skills record and they're a non-public student, that's when they're automatically set to number 3. And that's why you don't see the number 3 actually listed here as a choice. For number 4, Same thing as number 1. If this is marked as number 4, local neglected program, then it automatically reports it as a 4 for all students with a basic skills record. And I'll be showing you right now where that is located. And the other one is 5, not applicable, or was not served, is reported to the state. So basic skills is one of the tracking records that are possible in Genesis. You'll see that's one of the main tabs for the student, though. Basic skills. When a student's in a program, all that's needed is a program code, typically reading, language, math, science. Fill out your school year and your start date. Right, and then you just need the enrolled in program to be checked off. Right, and that is enough for Genesis to identify them as Title I, depending on how their school is set on the screen we just went over. Right. So again, a great reference for that is the bottom of our student management article here. And we have a whole section on how Genesis automatically sets the Title I indicator field. That's right after where it talks about how it identifies CDS codes. Right, so based on the school's value, this is what's going to be reported. So this is everything I just went over if you want a good reference for this. And again, you can always fill out the override field as well, or math change that as needed. Right, it's also in our slide. On to the next slide. Again, we're still talking about tracking records here. Right, so tracking records part 3. So we're now going to go over the student special ed tab, and then we're going to go right into share time tracking records. So we're still in the mode of talking about tracking records, right? And now I want to visit the student special ed tab. All right, student special ed tab is where you will find their evaluation record as well as their IEP data. And so the evaluation has their referral date for evaluation and their overall status if they're eligible. Once they're determined eligible, system will allow you to create an IEP. I know many districts have this syncing with their IEP platforms such as Frontline. So you would see their evaluation record listed first, their IEP record listed second. They can have multiple records, so you may see multiple records on this screen. Just make sure you're looking at the current one as far as the current reporting period. So one of the fields, going back to one of the previous screens categories, this is where our non-public field was set. This was our first step in marking a student as non-public. Every student has a non-public checkbox on their category screen. Again, if the school that they're in Genesis is marked as non-public, then that will be marked non-public for you already for all of your students. The next step in reporting the non-public field to the state would be on the special ed tab. Right, so this is something that's part of the evaluation record. So I'm going to click the pen and pencil to open that up. Right, and you're also required to have an eligible evaluation status. Right, so if it's still in process, it won't show you that special field. Once you select is eligible, here is the actual non-public field that would be reported to the state. Right? So they collect either a value of REC or NREC. So that'll report accordingly based on your selection here. And then our special education classification code, that's also taken from this screen, but this is under the student's IEP. Right? So these are records on the bottom. And we can see for this student here, state classification code is filled in. Those are then translated to one of the NJSLED's possible codes. And to see how they're translated, the best thing to do is to refer to that same Genesis document for student management fields. You'll see this is actually listed within the field itself. So the notes that we have for special education classification, those will come up here. So, based on their classification that you indicated, the correct number is reported. It also has some information on how it reports students as 00, indicating that they are not eligible. All right, and students that are former special ed students and that have exited, in which case they would receive a code 99 for classification. Right, so this document is a great reference for how it handles those. Right, even some troubleshooting tips. So students with code 99, they're not going to be reported for students who exited special ed on or after the last day of school in the previous year, right? So in that case, the student would have been reported as exited in your last year's submission, but for this year, you would no longer have that. So if you're not sure why you're missing the 99 or why it's coming up there, just take a look here. I might explain why. It also says to ensure that you have the use on NJ Smart Special Ed, otherwise it will not be reported. So looking at the student's IEP, and this takes us to our next field, which is the declassification special ed date. All right, so to declassify a student, the IEP has to have the spec ed exit reason field populated, as well as the spec ed exit date. Right, and then that will become the declassification date reported to the state. Right. The IEP in that case will turn red just to indicate they have now exited special education. So for the districts that have their special ed data coming from another system and syncing with Genesis, they should also be able to put in the exit date and exit code when the time comes. All right, and then once they do, that will update Genesis with the latest information. And now fields that are controlled now by the share time tracking record, right? So these next two fields, again, they're not together in the submission file. They're separate, so we're just going to include them together because they're both reported the same way. So we first have an enrollment type, and that's a newer state field that collects whether they're full or share time enrollment. Okay, so as long as you have a share time record in place for the student, then they'll be coded as share time. So let's look at more of those tracking records. So now I'm going to visit the tracking tab once again for my student. And this time I'm going to go under other, right? Just below that, we have the share time tab. So these are our share time tracking records. Okay. So to add one of these records, you can click add. And again, we have the CGS code search to bring up the school that they are attending share time with your district. Okay, so perhaps a technical school, you're going to indicate share time sent or received. Right? So if they're sent outside of your district for share time, select sent, and then the start date in which they're starting that enrollment. Right, so just the fact that there's a tracking record in place, that means that they are a share time student, and Genesis will report them as such. It also splits the reporting of their attendance, so attendance values are cut in half for that reason. Right, then the next field is called reported shared voc. Right? So the state's definition for that is if a student is a share time vocational school student being reported by the county vocational school. Right? So Genesis reports a yes for that field if your district is set to a vocational school district. Okay, so that's within your setup district and the modified district screen, which is in your list of districts, and you just click into your district name. Right, so you have a district type here that could be set to a vocational school district. If it is, then as long as the student has a share time record that's received, right, that's when they would get a yes in the reported shared voc column. Right, and then for the going back to our receiving and attending CDS codes, obviously this could be one of the places where those are obtained from by the system. Right, so this is one of their attending schools, so take a look at that guide on how the CDS codes are reported, and it may tell you when and at what points the system decides to use their shared time school for those fields. Right, and on to more tracking records. So we have next the lunch tracking, the alternative education tracking, and the tuition tracking. Right, so these are actually all fields within the same area under tracking other for the student. Right. Next one we want to talk about is lunch. So this one's very straightforward and simple. The state is looking to see if they're free or reduced lunch as of the snapshot date. So for this, Genesis is simply looking to see if they have a tracking record for lunch. These are very simple. It's really just a lunch code and an effective date. Right, so during the year, they'll look something like this. Student qualifies for free lunch based on income, and here's their start date. Right, so this tells me as of the fall submission, the student's going to be reported as free lunch. But everything that's free is just reported as F, except for the New Jersey free, which reports as an S. We have the reduced codes, and then everything else would be a no. Right, so that always is going to pull their lunch code as of today. Right, and then our next tracking record. Next tracking record is our also under other, our alternative education program. Right, so this is just an indication that they're in the program. If so, you can indicate their start date. This is another one where end date is optional, and you can leave that open-ended to have the student continuously showing up in that program. We don't have a use for this in Genesis. I believe this is only connected to the state report. The state's definition of this is an indication that the student's enrolled in an alternative education program defined as a comprehensive educational program delivered in a non-traditional learning environment. It's distinct and separate from the existing general or special education program, and it's designed to meet the needs of students at risk of failure and so on. So, this is only for specific students, and this is the only requirement for reporting that New Jersey field is just the fact that they have an alternative education tracking record. So if this is in place, it'll just report that field with a Y for yes. Right, and then on to tuition code reporting. Right, so the state has a tuition code field. This is taken from the student tuition tab, which is another tab under tracking other. All right, so just having the tuition tracking record in place with the code. Right, so this tracking record, there's a little bit more to it. You have also a start and end date, but now you have the tuition code. Right. So this is, for the most part, a reason why a student is attending out of the district or received from another district, and it's referring to payment and where tuition is being sent. Right. You want to choose the proper code there. The New Jersey Student Field Handbook is the best place to go to get definitions of each of those. So page 63 of their handbook. All right, so going down a little bit further, yeah, tuition code. It'll tell you exactly what sort of students this is required for. There's actually a lot of different bullet points for whether or not it's required. So take a look at that, because there are specific situations where maybe you entered a tuition code, but it's still not required, or it's required that you don't send one. So there's little situations like that you should get yourself familiar with. And then down below, it goes through the codes themselves and specifically what they mean. So choose the right one for Genesis, what you think is the most appropriate. Put in the start date. You can get away with just using the first day of school. All right, and then the next part is the CDS code. Okay, this is only something you want to fill in if they are sent out of district. So if you put CDS codes here, the system is going to think that they're an out-of-district student being sent to that school and district. Okay, so you only want to enter those if they are being sent out of district and that's the school they're attending. So just filling in that start date and tuition code is enough to give the student a tuition code, and the system will identify them as being received. Okay, so students with a tuition tracking are considered received because they don't have any out-of-district school codes indicated here. Students that do, most likely that out-of-district school that you're indicating there, that will most likely become the students attending school and district for the report. So just be aware that depending on what you do here under tuition tracking, it can impact your reporting when it comes to the attending and receiving school codes, as we mentioned earlier. That's another great reference right after our article on the fields. If you scroll just past the fields, it goes over how to set your receiving and attending codes. And part you'll see in there is our tuition records. It's part of what Genesis looks at to identify their school codes. Right. So takeaway from this is never put in the CDS code if the student, unless the student is sent, right? Because this can impact your numbers for state reporting, as well as the values reported for their attending school. All right. This also impacts your ASSA report. Okay. And then the next one we get to is our home list tracking record, where that information is maintained. Here's our slide on just showing you what the home list fields are. Okay. So the first one, just called home list, the state is asking for either a Y1, a Y2, or an N. So N is reported if the student is not homeless, and Genesis will do so if there's no homeless tracking record in place. The difference in the Y1 versus Y2 is whether or not the student has been in the custody of a parent for the homeless reporting. Okay. And that's reported just based on a simple checkbox on their homeless tracking record. So I'll add one of these right now so you can see. So tracking other and then homeless for the student we're working on. Same concept, we have a start and end date. And then it's this checkbox here. Student has been in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian at some point during the school year. Okay. As long as that's enabled, Genesis will report the Y1 as per the state requirement. And then a Y2 if it is unchecked. So Y1 indicates they were in the custody of a parent. Y2 is they were not in the physical custody of a legal parent or guardian. The homeless primary nighttime residents, and as a matter of fact, the next two as well, homeless instructional service and homeless support service. These are all taken from that same tracking record. So when this tracking record is added, you will see those items right in front of you. Primary nighttime residence is required for all students reported with a Y1 or Y2. Okay. So indicate their primary nighttime residence. And the following two fields, homeless student is receiving instructional services and homeless student receiving support services. So those are also fairly new fields included on the report. Okay. Just make sure you save if you adjust any of those items. There's a little save button to the right here. Okay. Right. So as we go through this, you'll start to slowly see all of your NJ SLEDS fields being populated. So just revisiting the NJ SLEDS tab for the student. If in case you missed this before, this is the student management report. In other words, this is showing you all the values that will be reported for this student the very next time you submit your file to the state. So you can check it for completion for any fields in which you clicked override and you have a override value. You can take a look at any errors that Genesis might be showing you. Those will appear in red in the error column. You also have shortcuts from this screen to various places on the student record where these items are set. Okay. And you can see there's a, the order is very different from the order in which I'm going over everything today. The ones we recently did regarding homeless fields, those happen to be all bunched together conveniently. And this is what we just filled out for the student just now. So that's what this screen is giving you. It's a glimpse into their New Jersey reporting record. And we can visit this as soon as we're done adjusting those fields. We can see what the result is by going directly to this screen right after. Right, so these fields are all now complete for their homeless data fields. Brings us to our last type of tracking record, ML tracking. So this one is all about tracking for our English language learner students. We've seen a lot of updates to the state's required fields regarding these in the last few years. In fact, this always seems to change every year, so I wouldn't be surprised if the requirements change again for next year. All right, so these are now all the fields that relate to the student being in a language program. And these fields are all over the submission, so we're going to go over them in an order that makes more sense. So first of all, is the student eligible for an LIEP? Right, so is the student eligible for a language instruction program? For this, Genesis is looking at once again, their tracking. This time it's going under ML. So my example student here is enrolled in the program, right? It has a date in which they were referred, has their start date for having this record here. So start date in being an ML student, and they were found eligible. All right, so those are three items required for getting this in place. So again, the field is just, are they eligible for an LIEP? So Genesis is looking here for that information, and then it's looking to see if they were found eligible or not found eligible. If they're found eligible, then a yes is reported for that field. If they're not found eligible, then a no is reported for that field. And for all other students, it's just blank. Next, we have the LIEP start and end date. So this is going to report the corresponding ML tracking record, right? And it just uses the ML start date as the LEIP start date. The end date would just be the exit date if you have one filled in. So if they have exited the program, that will be used as the reported LEIP end date. They also give us fields for start date 2 and LEIP end date 2. Right, this is if the student has an additional record. So if they were in another program, perhaps they moved out of one instructional program and then into another ML program. Right, that's when you would see both of those fields being filled in. Right, otherwise, if you just see one program, you'll only see one set of start and end dates. Okay. Then we get to the ELP screener date. Right, and this populates for students with, as long as they have the eligible for LIEP filled in. Okay, so if you have a student and that's a blank field for them, then they will not have an ELP screener date. And the system will look at a couple places to get the ELP screener date. Right? First, it's going to look and see if the student has any ML tests. So to check on that, we would go to the student's main ML ELL tab, right, and then see if there are assessments in place. I'm sorry, list test. Yep. So to get the date, Genesis is going to use the testing date if it finds one on this screen. And that's the first place it'll look for the ELP screener date. If there's none there, next thing it's going to do is look under the Students NJ SLEDS tab, and under the Student Fields tab, which we were on before, you have an override for ELP screener date. And it's actually telling you right here, because this student happens to have one, it's telling us it is deriving this right now from that test, which we have this date on there. Still allows you to override that. So just be careful when you're coming here to indicate a date. Genesis may already have the right date for you. And if the date is still not found, then in that case, Genesis will revert to using defaulting to the ML start date, right? So that start date that was reported as the LIEP start date, it'll also become the ELP screener date if Genesis doesn't see there's one in place, right? So it's all about satisfying the requirements for you. The next ML field we have, we're actually going to skip parent refusal and leave that to the end of this list. Language Instruction Educational Program, in other words, LIEP. That's talking about the specific program the student is in. All right, so that's going to be right in the middle of their tracking record. All right, and that's where you're indicating what program are they in. Only one in here that does not translate to a New Jersey code would be the ones pre-K no program, and also parent refused technically is not a program, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So all these codes were in Genesis for some time now. The state has specific codes that these would then translate to. And once again, I'm going to refer to our article on student management submission. All right. So this is linked in from within the PowerPoint presentation, just so everyone knows. So eventually, we get down to a lot of the ML reported fields. For this one in particular, the student's LIEP, it's telling us this is reported based on the program field, and we have to see below for how that translates to NJ fields. Right, so this is another additional reference below that big table of fields. Right. How the LIEP is derived based on program name. So this is simply just a list of the possible LIEP codes that LEDS uses. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. The Genesis programs that would report those values, right? So if a student is in bilingual tutorial program and you selected that as their program, right, these are all the possible Genesis programs. In that case, it will report a number 3 for the student's LIEP. Okay. ESL student, ELS, that will be reported as a 5. And if you selected preschool program, they were reported as 7. Then we have the language of instruction field, LIEP language of instruction. This is simply asking the language of instruction they're enrolled in, so that you can indicate that right on their ML tracking record. And that will be the reported language of instruction. Now, returning back to the parent refusal, this has received a lot of changes over the years. This used to be one of the possible programs you can report a student into. And this is now a date in which the parent refused program. So even though child was eligible, parent refused to put them in the program. Okay. So to code that, Genesis still has actually that program in for parent refused. So it's actually still in our dropdown as a program. And this is a good thing because we could essentially transfer the student out of the program and into parent refused. We've heard a number of districts who have students who were previously enrolled in an ML program, but then later the parent decided to take them out. Okay. So it's important to know that going into this, if they should have a tracking record that shows eligible in program, and then going to a parent refusal situation, or if the student was found eligible but they never entered the program and the parent refused, and that explains the reason. Okay. So you're either going to have 2 records or 1 record, depending on which situation is the case. So this is how you would transfer them. So with taking your existing tracking record for ML, I'm simply going to switch the program to parent refused. So here's what happens. When you switch a program, there will be a pop-up asking you if you'd like to actually track this as a transfer of the student to the new program. So in this example, we're saying that the parent is refusing, and we'll just use today's date. So that's the effective date of their entry into the new program, and technically this is not a program, it's a parent refusal. But this is how we would code that. So I could fill this out and press OK to move forward with the transfer. Cancel is just if you want to change the program name and not create a new tracking record. So I'm going to click OK so that it completes that transfer. And what it does is it actually creates an additional tracking record on the screen. Right, so their original one still has the original referral date, ML start date, and they were found eligible. They have a program start date for the English language services, and then the parent refused. So we have a more recent tracking record. Program start date is now the 13th, and parent refused. We should see that update on the NJ SLED side of things when we look at the students' fields. So in this list, they are definitely in a different order. We have their eligible for LIEP. That's yes. We have their start date of their original ML start date, and then the LIEP end date was the parent refusal date. So that was put in for both. All right, in this case, we do not have a second ML program to report, even though they have two tracking records. That was left blank. And then we have our ELP screener date field. Because the student is no longer in language instruction education program, that field was in turn left blank for them. Okay, removing what I did for parent refused. Right, so now they're actually in a program. So we have the same information, they're eligible. They have a start date, but no end date. They don't have a parent refusal date anymore because we took that out. The ELP screener date is still in place, and now we have the LIEP code of 5 because they're currently in the program. And just to revisit that once more, I'm actually going to change this student program to parent refused. And then I'm going to click cancel so that it doesn't create a new record. It just allows me to indicate that. So although the student was found eligible, parent refused to enroll them in the program. And that's what we're reporting to the state in that scenario. All right, thanks for bearing with us, everyone. I know we're a little bit past our 2-hour time frame. All right, so we're going to try and quickly get through the rest of the fields here for you. The fields that deal with attendance in a student management submission. Okay, so these are pretty straightforward as far as where they're derived from in Genesis. The first related field is called days open, and a lot of people get confused by this because they think it is the same as a previous field that was collected, days in membership. Okay, so state used to have a field called number of days in membership that would represent the number of possible days for that student specifically. Days open is not the same definition. So days open is simply how many school days are part of your current school year. So in other words, how many days are in your calendar that students can possibly attend. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be 180 or something similar. Okay, and this is saying this is controlled by your school calendar, right? So if you have any issue with days open, head over to your calendar module and then click into the schools tab, and that should be selected for you already. So if you go to the calendar, just make sure you're under the right school for Genesis. And just below the calendar, it will tell you how many days are in your school year? How many school days where students can actually attend? Again, our demo district here starts very early, so we can do training for everyone. We have 201 days in our school year. So this would be the open days that's reported to the state in this case. The other choice you have versus using your school calendar, the other choice you have is just to override that number for all the students in the district. This is something you would do in your New Jersey module under NJ SLEDS reports. It's just down past the snapshots, and the override field for that is here. Override days open value for SID collections. And it's that easy. The next few fields are actually dealing with student attendance specifically. Right? So the number of days they were present, the number of days they were absent, and so on. Right? So these two fields in particular, number of days present, number of days absent, those have everything to do with chronic absenteeism. So your chronic absenteeism counts are being derived based on those two items. So when you send the state over your present counts, your absent counts, those are the numbers it's using to derive that. It is not factoring into the number of state excused absences. That number also has nothing to do with your present and absent counts. Right? So these counts are all listed under the students attendance tab. From a student record, you can go under attendance and view all that information there. So each of those is broken out separately. Your absences count, right? Your state excused absences and your remote absent and present reporting. State excused and remote, it's really all based on your attendance codes. So you're going to have certain attendance codes that are marked as virtual, indicated by this column, and some attendance codes can be marked state excused, such as a religious holiday or take a child to work day or a college visit. So reporting an absence, that's simply if you have an absence indicated here in the absence column, either excused or unexcused. So reporting a student virtually absent becomes having a code for both representing an absence and a virtual day in school. Right? So you would want a separate code for reporting of a student who's virtual and absent, as well as absent in person. And then you will you'll have the right totals reported. We do have another training video if you would like to look that up, remote attendance reporting. Right, so this was very popular, obviously back during the pandemic, so that's when we have our video from that. Right, and then the other thing we want to point out regarding attendance is how to key that in for your out-of-district students where you don't take daily attendance on them on a day-to-day basis. Right, so this is done in the New Jersey module back under the NJ SLEDS tab. Okay, there is a tab dedicated just for this called NJ Smart Attendance. Again, we are still in a transition period, so this will be receive a new title change momentarily. Okay, so this is just bringing up our list of out-of-district students, and the system knows who to show you here. And you're basically just filling in these fields that you want to report for those students, right? Just make sure they're accurate and make sure you save student attendance at the bottom. So these you can think of as overrides for reporting their attendance, and it's all because you don't take daily attendance on them within Genesis. All right, everyone, so we're nearing the end. This takes us to our slide all about the graduation fields for NJ SLEDS. All right, so let's take a look at the first one, biliterate. The biliterate is for students who pass a world language assessment as well as meeting ELA graduation pathway requirements. Let's take a look at that for my example student now. Right? All the students have an assessments tab where your standardized test scores are held. Within there is a sub-tab called World Language Assessment. Okay, so all the student needs to have is an assessment here with a test code, a language code, date that they were assessed, and then the fact that they passed the assessment. And we can see they have one already here, but now I'm adding an additional one for a different language code and a different test. So now they have two different world language assessment types and different languages. In addition, the graduation pathway needs to be satisfied for ELA. That means the student passed their English language arts requirement in order to graduate high school. So this takes us to a tab we haven't looked at before called graduation. And for help on this screen, we actually have several areas in the documentation just because there's a lot that goes into this. There are assessments and how-tos on importing your assessment scores. The assessment scores are actually mapped to a pathway, and PUT scores are entered into Genesis. And based on all of that, Genesis determines, okay, are they passing the are they satisfying the requirement for graduating and for that subject? So it analyzes both math and ELA and makes separate determinations accordingly. First thing you want to know about this screen is in regards to the pathways. Ultimately what Genesis will report as the pathway is down here for ELA and then math. Okay, so this is saying they are meeting the ELA graduation pathway. Going back to our biliterate field, the two items I mentioned are required to report them biliterate. So one was the fact that they had an assessment in world language assessments that they passed. The next is on the graduation screen, they have an ELA pathway. In that case, Genesis will automatically report them as biliterate. You can override that by checking off Seal of Biliteracy directly on their Categories tab. So that's under Demographics. And check off Seal of Biliteracy, and it says this is a manual override. All right, the next state field has to do with those assessments that you saw me put into the students' world language assessment. Okay, so one being the world language assessment. That's the actual test that they took. So that's based on test code and telling the state what assessment was taken. The world languages that were assessed is taken from the language code that they were taking the test for. And then you'll notice that that has 1 through 5. So those fields may repeat for the student. Right? So if they have multiple assessments, then it will list them all up to 5. Right, and then we get to the 2 graduation pathway indicators. Okay, so this is a couple years old now. NJSmart began collecting this a few years ago, and it's required for all of your graduating seniors. The graduation pathway indicators, those are all done on the student's graduation tab. As I mentioned, if the student already has assessments that would otherwise qualify them to graduate, they will be listed here. And in addition, if the student's score meets the score requirement for graduation, that's what highlights these records in green. So what you want to know about these assessments is if there's an assessment on file for the student and it is one of the graduation requirements possible, then it will list it on the screen for you automatically. right? If it's not being listed, then you may have incorrect graduation mapping, and that we have a separate training on if you'd like to watch that or take a training on that from us. Right? If the score is in green, then that means they met the cut score. And it's always going to try to use the NJ GPA assessment first. That's what the state wants as their first pathway. Only if they take the NJ GPA and they don't pass, can you report them with one of the second pathways, which is most of the other assessments that you see. Just to take a look at that, we're going to now look at the right side and look at the two override fields that are available. Okay, so these are the other requirements that you can enter. So if they did pass the NJGPA, you can indicate S for that. You just want to fill out first pathway. Or if they took one of their secondary pathways, let's say for math, they passed the SAT, this would have to be reported as their second pathway. Right, so overrides for the graduation pathway indicator, obviously these are not all of them, because if we look at the handbook, there's additional ones such as meeting a portfolio appeal or meeting alternate requirements specified in the IEP. And those two items are checked off on the left side. Right, so as soon as you check these off, they're saved. System will then tell you if these pathways down here, which is what it's reporting for the student, it'll mention if these are overrides. And that's how you can tell. Typically, you wouldn't have these enabled if your overrides in the right side are enabled. And the only time you would want to use these overrides here to specify an assessment is if you don't have assessment scores for the student in your system. Okay. If you're not sure or everything's blank for some reason, you can also try clicking on recalculate for the student. So if there's any recently added test scores for them, or you changed anything within the setup of your assessment score mapping, this will make sure Genesis is looking at all the latest information. All right, the other override for these pathway fields is the denied graduation drop down. Okay. And so there's 4 choices there. I'm going to take a quick look at the handbook to once again look at the state's different values for graduation pathway. First, we have the ELA graduation pathway indicator. Again, it's really something that's required for all your seniors. And they give the full list. So they start out by mentioning the assessment. Okay, so the pathway codes that are reported based on students passing a certain assessment. Beyond those are your M and N codes. Those are the additional checkboxes for alternate requirements in the IEP or portfolio appeal. Then you get to the other pathways that do not indicate graduation. So O for denied graduation. Okay, so that's failure to satisfy the NJ GPA requirement or demonstrate proficiency on that requirement or any other substitute tests or appeals. P is denied graduation for any other reason other than that. Right, and then this one, Q, is historic statewide assessment, which is available for you to select as one of the overrides or both the ELA and math pathways. Right. And then R just signifies graduation assessment requirements were not yet met. That's simply what Genesis will report for you by default if it doesn't find anything else. Okay, so you'll just get an R as a default, just to satisfy the state's requirement for having a value in that field. So again, we have a few other trainings to supplement this with. such as taking the training on assessments, whereas we show you how to import assessment scores as well as how to set up your graduation mapping. Okay. Last graduation related fields, and the last field for us to cover today is the FAFSA completion indicator. This is actually something that was also added to the students graduation tab. And the state has this at the very end of their handbook. So very last page is FAFSA completion indicator. Okay. And this has to do with a new graduation requirement that every student has to fill out an application for financial aid, the FAFSA, in order to graduate. So to enforce that, they've added that to the student management report that requires that you fill it out for any student who's graduating 12th grade. Right, so the choices for that are C, that the student has completed the FAFSA. Okay. Next choice is E, for students that have a waiver provided from the parent or counselor exempting them from filling out the FAFSA. Okay. So basically, the parent or child, they applied for financial aid, or they've indicated, no, we understand, but we're not applying for financial aid. Okay. The only other choice, so basically in order to enforce this and requirement, the only other choice is to report an N, but that is only allowed to be used for students who are not graduating. Okay. All right, so you want to make sure this is complete for all your 12th graders. So the students going into their senior year this upcoming year, that is going to be your main focus for having this field complete. And there's different ways to do it. Referring to our handbook, or I should say our Genesis documentation, it goes over the field, and it starts out by saying, the Genesis field is listed here. FAFSA requirement is the name of the Genesis field, and it's under their graduation screen. And then Genesis will report a C for if they completed the requirement. So if you indicated completed, Genesis will report the C. If you enter waived here, that's when Genesis will report the E for provided a waiver. And then the other choice is denied if you want to put in an N. Okay. Ways to enter this. So this is another field that has a mass change available to it. We've also have districts who use a parent form. Genesis released a parent form to allow you to collect this information from parents. So basically the parents can go out and log in and say that they've filled out the FAFSA or they would like to waive. Their answer is put in here according to who filled it out and when, and the requirement is selected properly based on the response. The other way to get this information into Genesis is to use the file provided by HESA. As we understand, they have a running list of all the students who did apply for financial aid. They provide their districts with a file with that completion status, and that file can be then used to import into Genesis and populate those FAFSA requirement fields for you. That is done under the New Jersey module, under Tools, and we have a dedicated screen for importing the FAFSA file. Right? It accepts the formatting provided by HESA. If you want some more information on that, we have a link to the FAFSA import screen here. If you'd like to view that. So it talks all about how to import the FAFSA and different ways to set that field.